effectively you couldn't run a war without horses. Well, horses were fundamentally important because they did all the things. They were effectively the vehicles, the motor vehicles and the tanks and the helicopters and the trucks of their day. So actually most of the horses were important not for being used directly in the war in terms of cavalry and officers' horses, but for pulling and carrying, so pulling heavy guns and pulling trucks and carrying ammunition and things like on their backs. By the time the horses got out actually to what they were doing in the front, they'd have been shipped around a lot by train and ship and so on. I think all of the horses were subject to the same sort of bad conditions, whether they were cavalry horses or the horses doing the pulling and carrying. Most of the time they'd be tethered at night out in the open, so they, particularly at the start of the war, there were large losses due to cold. At the start of the war, about 9% of the horses that were out there were there to be used in a traditional cavalry role. Most of the horses, of course, therefore, are the horses that are doing the jobs like pulling guns, mostly behind the lines. So possibly of all the horse jobs, it's a slightly safer thing to be doing because you're that bit further away from the enemy. It's with both artillery and with men with guns. Horses are targeted because they're such a fundamental part of war at that time. So if you can take out as many as you can of the enemy's horses, then you can steal an advantage. So unfortunately there are lots of accounts of horses being tethered behind the lines waiting for action and getting targeted with artillery and things like that. A reasonably large number of horses were sent back to Britain to be sold by the army. Now, these were very much the best horses of what the army had at the end of the war. Of course, it was faced with a massive problem at the end of the war in that the army had far too many horses compared to what it needed on a normal peacetime establishment. So the very best horses were sent back to be sold because they needed to recoup some of the money that they of the 36 million pounds then that they'd spent buying the horses in the first place. So about 140,000 were actually sent back and were sold overall by the army. So they would have just sent back the best horses that they thought would raise the most money, effectively. A large number of the rest of the horses that were less good than the ones they sent back to Britain, in the army's eyes, were sold in France and Belgium to farmers and people like that to be used as working horses. Yeah, generally the horses had a pretty rough time of it.